Fellow Freedom fans, David Ellen Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio on this Nooga-Radio network in the Shangri-La of Liberty, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and to our friends in Western Georgia, Northwestern Georgia, and Northeastern Alabama, just so you know where you are on the compass. We're got an important issue today. Tennessee, bless their hearts, Senate Bill numero uno. It's actually been passed into law in Tennessee. It goes into effect July 1st. And what it is, it's a prohibition against maiming minors. It's an amazing, important bill. And the U.S. Department of Justice is offended by it. And they've got a lawsuit going on right now in the U.S. District Court of Western Tennessee. And they're suing in the U.S. District Court to get an injunction to stop Tennessee from prohibiting the maiming of minors. It is an amazing, it's a divine stupor that is on our nation right now. It's just like a Department of Injustice machine. Now, we're going to read from the actual complaint today. We're going to read from the actual Senate Bill number 1, because you don't want to just hear my opinion. You don't want to just hear opinions of human beings. You would like to actually, what is the substance? What is it? Why should you think what you think? So I'm actually going to be offering my time today to read the actual Senate Bill 1, portions of it, not the whole thing. It's pretty big. And also I'm going to read from the complaint to see if the complaint is like right dead on spot, or is it just completely a lie? So there's the question. We're going to discover that right now on Preservative Talk Radio. As I was contemplating these things and what our mission is as parents, I'm a parent and I have 4 offspring. They're no longer children. The youngest one is 24 years old. And they've all reached a maturity physically where their brains are not in the brain damaged mode. So say between 12 and 22. That is for me, for young men. I was a young man once. And I understood that at the age of 12, I was in dysphoria. I'd lost my mind. I was confused. I had weird chemicals going to my brain. I had things happening, chemical changes in my body that I didn't understand. And let me just tell you, it confused the snot out of me. I had interests, and we're going to say like sexual interests that I'd never had before. All that stuff had not been birthed chemically yet. So I had, so there's a lot of confusion going on in that age. And that's why we have to protect our children. It just occurred to me that one thing I was not subjected to as much as they are today is visual sexual content. Today, the conduct on TV, we don't watch this stuff on TV, but what we do, we kind of like, if you're going between the news and Hogan's Heroes, right? So you're paging up to go from just that. You're going from the news or Jeopardy or whatever it is, and now Jeopardy's getting profane. Not Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune. I mean, it's just you're celebrating people's lives that are not moral. So you didn't have that stuff when I was young, but now you've got all this visual stimulus. There was things I think back on in the 60s where it was part of television. It was like demonstrated as romance, that when people were romantic, in particular, the women began to disrobe. I noticed that as a child. And so guess what? That was stimulating. It was intended to be stimulating. It was evil. So what our job is as parents is to not subject our children to that sort of stimulus that is completely inappropriate. It just is. Well, she was only in like a negligee. All right, just put on the clothes, okay? Let's not do the disrobe thing. So even the suggestiveness of the disrobing. So romance is particularly tied to disrobing. Very bad training for young men. Very bad. I think young men need to be trained that they can romance their wives, for romance sake, that it's not tied to disrobing. So we didn't get that, as children, even in my age, is that it began to, the television was really becoming corrupt, and it was designed to bring us where we are today. And and the natural result is dysphoria, is confusion, is dementia. That is the fruit of that corrupt seed. And it's proliferated crazily today on all these things that we watch, cable TV, whatever, it's on the airwaves. It doesn't matter what it is. It's visual stimulus that is inappropriate for our children. So take that and think about that. In fact, you can change your lifestyle. You can't erase what you've already exposed your children to, but you know what you can do? You can actually eliminate the exposure. So it's something to think about, because it is something that us as parents, we're supposed to morally protect our children from that sort of influence. If it weren't for the TV, if you were just off in your ordinary farmer in the dell lifestyle of old before television, you would not be displaying that sort of conduct with your spouse in front of your children. You'd be flirty, you'd be patting a little bit here, like baby, you'd be flirting and stuff like that, but you don't go in the disrobe mode in the kitchen with your kids there. If you do that now, it's because you've been influenced by corrupt and wicked programming. So it's a little bit disturbing opening to this Preservative Talk Radio. But what I'm trying to bring to our minds is there's a natural obligation and duty for us to protect our children. Because between the time, again, and they're young, if we give them moral protection, I wish, there's moral protection more than I had. I had, let's say, exposed to the wrong things at a very young age. And I wish that hadn't happened, because it had a negative influence on my development. So we need to protect our children from that stuff. That's a duty that we have. And because especially when they get to their adolescent stage between 12 and, I say 22, but 12 and 15 especially, is that their chemicals are changing. They're confused. They're in dysphoria. We've been doing youth ministry since, really, as adults since 1987, maybe even before then. My wife and I both were in a lifestyle of mentoring our peers initially, and then when we became adults, we got married. And my wife, I guess she was an adult by then. Or no, she was still, she was young. She was maybe almost an adult. We began doing youth ministry. And what we've discovered over these decades is it's absolutely universal that these young people are in dysphoria. So a few months ago, we had a talk when we had a lot of this social contagion about the gender identity confusion. We had some gender identity predators coming into the youth ministry, and we had to basically draw the line and say, listen, we're here about conforming to God's norm. If you're not here about conforming to God's norm, don't come here. But you're going to be every time invited to conform to God's norm. If you're here to get a date, whether it's same sex or opposite sex, this is the wrong place. And you need to get your Rumpelstiltskin right on out of here immediately. Choose you this day whom you're going to serve, your flesh or Almighty God. So it was kind of an ultimatum that we had to put down. And then when those who were predators left, because they weren't here to get right with God, they were here to get a date. They were here to be predators. So they left. The predators left, and all of a sudden the sheep are at peace. And we were able to talk to them and say, and describe what dysphoria is. And then say, how many of you have been experiencing this? Every hand is raised. And then my wife would go on and explain to them. She really took a wonderful lead on this. And she explained to them, your brains are still developing, especially guys, right up to even to about the age of 22. So you're still half-baked, is what she said. And so just know that you are in dysphoria. Embrace it. Don't keep it, but know it's not your fault. You're not crazy. Well, you are crazy, but you're a normal crazy. This crazy that you're experiencing is normal until your chemicals get straight. You're confused, and you're in the midst of this urban social contagion that is really anti-creation, anti-image of God, and you're being subjected and bombarded to it by the media and by your teachers and all kinds of stuff, and you're in an alien world, and you're just going to have to get through it, and we're going to help you get through this. We're going to see you to the other side. So that's the encouragement that we gave these teenagers. But just know, parents, your kids are crazy. So you're worried about your going into your teenage years? I don't, unless you don't have the moral foundation that is necessary to walk them through it. So with my wife and I, we committed ourselves to studying the Word of God, to applying it in our lives early on in our relationship and then in our marriage, and kept conforming our lives as we got, as the revealed law of God was revealed to us, we applied it, began to see the fruit of it. And when I think we turned off the television right when my daughter was about 6 months old, and I was trying to get her attention. She's so sweet and everything like that. There's a baseball game going on behind me, and she was mesmerized at the baseball game, as slow as it is, and would not give me her attention. And all of a sudden I saw myself, and I realized, David, you're going to do the same thing to your daughter if you leave that machinery on. So I walked over and I turned it off, and I told my wife, Leslie, and I told her my little anecdote, and she's going, good. We'll be very deliberate about it. If we want to chill out at night and, before we go to bed, and the kids are in bed and there's no distress, if we just want to kill some time because there's time to be killed, we'll go for it. But we're not going to keep that machine on because the commercials are trash. You're going to get some preview of some profane thing that's going to come on at 9 o'clock at night, and you're not going to have the TV on, but they bombard you with the commercials again between the news and Wheel of Fortune. So we made a decision early on, and you know what happened when our kids became teenagers? We were so engaged with face-to-face conversation and everything, so that when our children got crazy, we were able to walk with them through the lunacy. You just know it's coming. You're going to have, once your kid turns about 12, you got about, they're kind of silly up till that time. They're a lot of fun. They're silly. They can't pay attention, but then all of a sudden they start paying attention to things that you don't want them to pay attention to. And you've got to get a hold of them and walk with them until you can launch them and kick them out of the nest. Not kick them out of the nest, but that your nest is a platform for their launch. And that's our goal. And I want to encourage you, as having 4 children that are now adults, and they're an absolute joy, and our grandchildren are now becoming a joy. But it's doable. But we've got to get through this dysphoria, and we've got to do it by mitigating the consequences, mitigating the damage of their dysphoric period. I got one thing. My son, I heard, I was just in my office doing work, and I can hear the garage door open, and I can hear the jack being dragged out. They're really heavy and they make a lot of noise as they're rolling. And so he's dragging the jack out, and I go, what's up with that? So I go outside, and I found out he had spun out at the curve down around the street, and he was going to try to sneak down and get it fixed without let me know. And I said, son, he wasn't in trouble. He was afraid. Oh, Dad, he's a fearful guy. I said, no, son, never not tell me. So I went and helped him solve the problem, protected him from an angry neighbor who saw his car spin out. I don't know if he's doing the testosterone thing, showing off for his girlfriend or not, or it's just a wet street. I have no idea. Didn't matter. We mitigated the damage. We walk with him through it because there's a short period of time, and eventually he's going to be prepared for his station in life. We'll be right back. Let me proceed. Testing. Test. Fellow Freedom fans, David Allen Carmichael back here with Preservative Talk Radio. Had to do the intro. Okay, you heard a lot about my family, my wife, my son, and my sons. And by the way, they're great. We love them. They're great. They're having a huge impact on the world now that they've gone through their dysphoria, and they got through it fairly successfully. So we're going to look at whether or not Tennessee has the power as a civil power, should be protecting children, minors, from themselves and their potentially crazy parents from mutilating themselves because of their current dysphoria or even their parents' dysphoria. And so whether the U.S. Department of Justice should be intervening and trying to get a United States court to say that these children have protection as United States citizens to maim themselves. So I'm going to read from the complaint right now. And here's the complaint from the United States Department of Justice. Senate Bill 1 prohibits certain forms of necessary... start up from the beginning. Says this lawsuit challenges a state statute, it's actually a Tennessee statute, that denies necessary medical care to children based solely on who they are. Makes me wonder when they don't say Tennessee statute, that they're thinking about adding other defendants there. They can just call it a state. So also, all people, including transgender youth, deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And the 14th Amendment demands that Tennessee not deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws of the U.S. Constitution, etc. So, there's the question. Does the United States law allow a minor to mutilate themselves? Maybe in Washington, D.C. they can do that. Congress has exclusive jurisdiction to pass laws of the District of Columbia. Maybe you can do all kinds of wicked things there in the Capitol. But what about Tennessee? Is it an autonomous state that has an opportunity, the police power, to protect children from the mutilation of their genitalia? There's the question. Senate Bill 1 prohibits certain forms of medically necessary care for transgender minors with a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Now, I found out this last night from a Tennessee man, Robert Barnes, who's kind of a famous online guy. He's got a lot of followers. And he was mentioning a case in California that is arguing that this is not merely dysphoria, this is nature. You're actually denying these people who have a natural propensity. This is not dysphoria. It's genetically wired as a matter of nature. So therefore, they should be protected for their natural right to mutilate themselves. That's the argument in California. Here in Tennessee, in the Western District of Tennessee, the United States Department of Justice is saying these people are crazy, and this is therapy for their lunacy. That's the take. With a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Specifically, Senate Bill 1 bans certain medical procedures and treatment for minors, including puberty blockers and hormones, if performed for the purpose of enabling a minor to identify with or live with an identity inconsistent with the minor's sex as assigned at birth. Now, I'm going to come back to that assigned at birth term. Or treating discomfort or distress from discordance between the minor's sex assigned at birth and their asserted identity. So this thing is fraught with dementia, in my observation. So, is the sex assigned at birth? Did the parents arbitrarily sign them up for something at birth and arbitrarily call them a boy or a girl? Was that completely just, it just showed up on their birth certificate? Is that what it was? Or, so it goes on to say, if there's a distress between discordance with the minor's sex assigned at birth and their asserted identity. Okay, so sex is, I saw this little thing. It was Steve, I can't think of the guy's name. He's a comedian. And he was interviewing this little girl who was pointing out these parts of a skeleton. And she could tell that the skeleton was a woman. This kid's like 7 years old. And he said, well, how do you know it's a woman? And she pointed out the hips. Girls, women, females have their hip bones are like this. Males, men, guys have their hip bones like this. So it's not merely assigned, it is absolute. It's you can determine it during life and after life. It's an objective fact. Here's the problem is, folks, we've got somebody at war. We've got a social contagion that is at war with objectivity. Objectivity is the evil. There are no absolute rights or no absolute wrongs. The only absolute right is I can do whatever I feel like doing, and if you don't like it, I'm pleased by it because in fact you don't have permission to not like what I'm doing. You're not liking what I'm doing is the absolute wrong. It's a state of dementia. We should call the United States of dementia. That's where we're going. Let's go on with this Senate bill, see what it says. While prohibiting, this is the complaint against Tennessee. While prohibiting certain forms of medically necessary gender-affirming care for transgender minors, that's the question. Is it medically necessary? I observed, there's certain facts that they try to allude to here, if not spelling out. These are kind of conclusory statements, not statements of fact. But I found out that they were false, that the Senate Bill 1 doesn't do what they say it does, because not by reading Senate Bill 1. Later in this complaint, I read their own complaint, and it was very clear that what they stated basically disqualified these opening statements. The statement of facts disqualified these opening conclusory statements. So while prohibiting certain forms of medically necessary gender-affirming care for transgender minors, SB 1 permits all other minors to access the same procedures and treatments. That is a false statement. It's part of their dysphoria. Whoever it is who's writing the complaint, it is their dysphoria. So you'll see how this works out. For example, SB 1 accepts the same medical procedures when they are used to treat a minor's congenital defect, precocious puberty, disease, or physical injury. Now, just for reality check, right, or a real sane mind here, in the same sentence, there was a comma between the place where it says all other minors. Same procedures and treatments, period. And then it goes to say that it's available to, so it says it's available to all other minors, but look at the minors that it's really available to. Tell me if this is all other minors. To treat a minor's congenital defect, precocious puberty, disease, or physical injury. That's not all minor children. It isn't their confusion dysphoria status that dictates treatment. It happens to do with a physical condition that is completely separated from any dysphoria. Genital defect. So you can physically fix a congenital defect. A family member of mine had a tear or some kind of thing stuck to their pericardium. And when they were 7 years old, they needed to have heart surgery. And the problem went away. They fixed the congenital defect. It had nothing to do with their dysphoria. It had everything to do with a particular thing in nature. Here's the thing in nature. The body of the child is supposed to work like this. There's a congenital defect that's causing a problem. We can physically fix the problem. Having normal genitalia are not a problem. That is by nature a right thing, not a wrong thing. It is not something that needs to be fixed due to dysphoria. So precocious puberty, not really sure what precocious puberty is. We can all do a browser search on that. Obviously, I'm saying, well, maybe it's got some puberty increase at the time of 6 years old or something. I don't know what that is. And I guess they give puberty blockers until they get 12. I don't know what that is. And again, that may be morally not sound, or a disease or physical injury. So there's a difference here about whether you're getting treatment from something that's an injury or a defect. That is a separate thing. But to say because of my confusion, I'm going to alter that which is good. I'm going to take that which is perfect, physically perfect, designed in nature to reproduce and to fulfill in nature what is the goal of the government. Why do we institute it? To protect life, liberty, and property. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That is the goal. Now, I'd be happier. My child seems right now would be happier if they were mutilated. They have a sometimes, and I've observed this, that there's a self-hate thing that happens. That children, again, working with youth for decades, will begin to mar themselves. Now, you can say, wait a minute, I've marred myself and I'm not like you said. Well, I don't know. When did you do it? Were you in dysphoria when it happened? How many gauges happen? How many different piercings happen? How many tattoos happening because of somebody's dysphoria? It's pretty high. Again, I've watched it. I've observed it happen. And there are kids that because of their anxiety, they need an outlet. So one of the social contagions now is to declare an opposite identity and then begin to pursue that because you've confused yourself before your time before you actually know what the reality is for your future. So I just can think of one person that I went to them and I said to them, and they had these piercings in their nose and their lip and their eyelid and all this kind of stuff, and they were marring their body. And I also knew their family, their story. I knew their parents' drug addictions and all the other things and all the kind of things that is where these children were not, let's say, subjected to a healthy family lifestyle. And they're in the middle of their dysphoria that's natural a teenager. And all of a sudden, this young lady just starts marring the snot out of her body. So I pulled her aside one day and I said, I'm going to give you a conversation I've never had with any other teenager because I said, I love you. It's important. I think you need to know that you are on the scale from 1 to 10. You can't take the credit or blame if you're like a movie star beautiful or crazily homely so that there's one person on the earth that be attracted to you. You can't take the credit or blame for that. That is beyond you. So I just want to let you know, on the scale from 1 to 10, you're way up there. You without any effort on your own part, God has blessed you with particular loveliness. And you may not understand that. You may not feel lovely. Internally, you don't feel lovely. That's part of the dysphoria. But I'm telling you, you are lovely. And if you mar yourself, you're actually marring a gift that God has given you. It's actually rebellion against God, and you're giving into a satanic, an adversarial lie when you mar yourself. So you're in charge of your own stuff. Your parents allow you to do whatever you're going to do. I just want to tell you that you're actually doing something that I think is I don't think it's worthy of you. And that's just my opinion. I'm never going to say it again. I always want to tell you I love you. And I don't think anybody's told you what I've told you, have they? And they said, no, they haven't. Guess who changed their behavior? Guess who doesn't have hardware coming out of their face anymore? The young lady was in dysphoria. She had stress in her life, and she was manifesting it in a self-destructive behavior because she thought it would make her feel good. We have people that cut themselves, and we know that's not right. We know that for a time they do it because they're in dysphoria and they think it's going to give them some relief psychologically. But it's dysphoria. We have a duty to protect these vulnerable, dysphoric, losing their minds only for a little bit, only for a time. We've got to get them through this dysphoric period, and then we're going to launch them in their station of life, and they're going to be at peace, and they're going to be happy, and they're going to be safe. We're going to be right back with Preservative Talk Radio. Okay. So I'm going to move forward. I'm going to get right into my third segment. Let's see if it actually does. Testing. Start monitoring. Test. Here we go. Test. Fellow Freedom fans, David Allen Carmichael. Preservative Talk Radio, engaging these issues on a constitutional basis, a biblical basis, and the basis of right versus wrong. Dysphoria. Whoa, yeah, that's what we're talking about today, dysphoria. Does Tennessee have the right to protect children from maiming themselves? That's the question. The U.S. Department of Justice, at least in the Western District of Tennessee, is under the belief that Tennessee should not be stopping children from maiming themselves during their lifestyle or their life situation period of dysphoria. And in the last segment, I talked about an anecdote of a tendency that I've observed over the last 35 years for teenagers in their dysphoria to do things that mar their body because of the anxiety that they're living through. I've observed it. And I gave you one anecdote of something that I just thought that I might give as an offer to a young lady. And it actually was life and health to her. Somebody needed to speak truth to her and not say, hey, if you're feeling dysphoric, if you'd like to mar your body, how about this hardware over here? Have you thought of that? Have you been completely relieved of your anxiety yet? No? Well, how about let's poke some more holes in you in a few different places. Have you ever gotten a knee piercing? I'm telling you what, you're going to be set free from your anxiety when you do some knee piercing. That's ridiculous, my friends. That's not a sound mind. So let's get to this. Okay, I read Senate Bill 1. No, I read the complaint. We're going to get to Senate Bill 1 because we're going to see whether the Senate bill actually is doing what the Department of Injustice says. I don't think so. But what I want to do is I'll tell you a little story. I started radio not a long time ago, and I started for 2 weeks. It was 2 hours a day, 5 days a week for 2 weeks, a kind of a pilot program. I wanted to bring what I called then Faith and Freedom Show. Now I call it Preservative Talk Radio. And I did it, it was just, I was about 10 hours into it, and it was on a rock station. It was interrupted a rock station at night from 7 to 9 p.m., 10 days. And it was an experiment to see how the talk radio format would go for that station. And again, I'm absolutely brand raw new with this format. It's where I'm talking about the issues, but I get to the substance. And so a lady called in, we're talking about something, and then we go to advertising time. And so I'm talking to her on the phone. I said, well, what do you think of this format? And she said to me, you are a genius. I'm not a genius, but, well, I don't know. I haven't done the genius test, so whatever. But what it was is I was saying things that were from geniuses. So I'm not the genius. I'm quoting other people. So if I want to say something that's substantive, it's not just somebody's opinion, just my opinion, I want to tell you, I want to get my opinion from something other than me, something better than me. So, of course, a biblical basis. Read the Bible. Constitutional basis. And right and wrong. How do I know right and wrong? I read the Bible. And right and wrong isn't necessarily in the Constitution. It's supposed to establish justice, make sure that rights are done and wrongs aren't. So it gives a machinery that we can set up a system to try to encourage that to happen. But what I did, I was reading the Ninth Amendment. It said there's these rights reserved. All these rights that aren't enumerated are reserved. Well, what are they? How do we know what the rights are? So it turns out I looked into what did the founders think those silly rights were. I found out that 10 years or more prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Sir William Blackstone had written the stuff. What I'm going to read today is the absolute rights of mankind. And what had happened is England had gone to this jurist, this guy, this law expert, professor, judge, I don't know what his job was. He was a pretty important guy. And said, please do a summary of the laws of the land so that we can read it and run with it. So we don't lose track of this. So we can put it all together in like a concise, something like in the book of, is it Habakkuk, where he says, tell the prophet to write the message on the stone so that people can come by, they read it and they know what to do with it. So can you do that for us, Sir William Blackstone? So he did. And he it was the commentaries on the laws of England. It has a book that's called The Introduction. Then there's book 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is, I believe, the introduction, and it's the absolute rights of mankind. So I'm going to read from Sir William Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England, because that's what the founders understood as they were, dealing with their situation there. They'd brought the common law over to the United States. In Virginia, I know they passed a statute that said the common law of England was the law of the land for Virginia. So the right of personal security consists in a person's legal and uninterrupted enjoyment of his life, his limbs, his body, his health, and his reputation. The government in their complaint used this term necessary medical treatment, necessary for their health. So that's it. They're going to use language that go back to these natural rights. I'm not going to go into right away, I'll do that on a different segment sometime, is the rights of a parent and the rights of a child, and the rights and duties of the parent and child. And I think it's called Of Parent and Child is actually the name of the particular section in the Absolute Rights of Persons. I think that's book 1. And it is a chapter called of parents and of the rights of parents and child. So you can look that up, and it's wonderful, important reading. But so we're going to be looking at this. Now, let's see what Blackstone thought here. Life is the immediate gift of God, a right inherent by nature in every individual, every individual. And it begins in contemplation of law. Now keep in mind this context, contemplation of law. That's where can mankind, where can society, where does the laws of society, where do they apply? Where can they reach? So there's some absolutes that at the time they couldn't know. And he's going to describe how they know absolutely that there's a life of an individual that has a right inherent by nature, where it is in the womb. And it was at the point of, well, we'll see it here, quickening. We now have technology that can know this inherent right of life in the individual. Begins much sooner because we can contemplate and know that the person exists earlier than we could in Blackstone's day. He says it begins in contemplation of law as soon as an infant is able to stir in the mother's womb. For if a woman is quick with child, that's the stirring of the womb, and by potion or otherwise, that would be the abortion pill, killeth it in her womb, or if anyone beat her, whereby the child dies in her body, and she is delivered of a dead child. Now this, he says, though not murder, was by ancient law homicide or manslaughter. So I think the reason why it is in nature murder, because it's the shedding of innocent blood. However, as far as proof goes, if the baby is out and not alive, the standard of proof for a capital crime to prove that the mother's potion did kill the baby. To prove that, and to prove that that potion was didn't think it was milk of magnesia. So to make something murder as a capital crime, I talked about this the other day, the standard of proof needed, because it's a capital crime, in Exodus it talked about when a mother is injured by somebody beating her, or somebody, two men fighting and somebody knocks into the woman, she bears a child. It says if the child, nothing happens, it's like a civil suit. But if the child dies, it's life for life. So it's a capital crime to shed innocent blood of the child in the womb. But as far as jurisdiction and the power of men to punish something for murder, the standard's so high, you can't actually prove absolutely beyond a reasonable doubt that it was actually the act of the mother that was the cause of the death of the child, because nobody's in there with a monitor on the baby. But so it was treated as a law of homicide or manslaughter. So murder in the second or third degree. It's still a life that has a right to life. And because it's a child, we have a duty to protect the child. Even if it's too bad, so sad, Mom, it's in your womb. This is a part of nature. You have a natural responsibility, though it may be inconvenient. So that's this idea. Now, I want to keep this in mind here, because we're going to go on talking about what Blackstone and the principles of law that are absolutely true. Mr. Blackstone explains it. So he goes on and says, an infant in the mother's womb is supposed in law to be born for many purposes. Okay? In law, it was quickening. But now we can know before mom feels it moving. It says it's capable of having a legacy or surrender a copyhold estate made to it. So it can already be somebody who can inherit. So the baby is in the mother's womb. It is the heir of whoever just left something. It may have a guardian assigned to it. So in fact, in reality, you know what? We ought to think about this. We got to protect these little ones. They ought to have a guardian ad litem. You want to kill a baby? Well, guess what? Should step up to the court hearing to prove that your health is so bad that you're saving your own life by killing the baby, that there's no less restrictive means to the baby but for you to kill it. Think about this, folks. What if you assigned the baby a guardian ad litem, and mother, you've got a duty to go up and tell the judge and to prove to the judge it is for the sake of the survival of yourself that you've got to get intervention and to terminate the pregnancy without a live birth, or otherwise it's murder. So this is the principle. This is the reality of law, that we are not, did you get this in elementary school? Did you get it in high school? This is so important. We've got a society that's we've lost our minds, and we don't have a reference. We're completely, wholly, and deliberately uneducated. So Blackstone says it may have a guardian assigned to it and is enabled to have an estate limited to its use and to take afterwards by such limitations as if it were actually born. So that's the reality of a child, the value of a child, and the responsibility that we have to preserve those least of these in our society. There's another place that Blackstone actually explains what actually the purpose of government is, and it was to protect the least protectable. Let's say protect the most innocent and vulnerable from the insults and injuries of the stronger. That is the understanding of the founders of this nation, and what should be our understanding if we hadn't been losing our minds, is that our duty is to protect those vulnerable from the insults and injuries of the stronger. So that's reality. I'm going to keep going with Blackstone here, and then I'm going to go back and we're going to read the complaint again from the U.S. Department of Justice, and we're going to also read the actual Senate bill, number 1, to see what it is that Tennessee is doing and whether or not it is the right thing to do. And I will say, if it's protecting the life of the innocent, it's leaning toward the right thing to do. If it's subjecting the law of the land to dysphoria, if it's to make every person and the state government of Tennessee a codependent to dysphoria, then I wouldn't be in favor of it. I don't think anybody should be in favor of it. But if the goal of the United States is to make sure all of Tennessee, all the people of Tennessee, those living on the land of Tennessee and the state legislature are codependent to dysphoria, then we've got a problem, United States Department of Justice. And again, we need to pray for these people. There's a serious dysphoria happening, very powerful places of government. So Blackstone continues, this natural life being as was before observed, the immediate donation of the great creator, cannot legally be disposed of or destroyed by any individual, neither by the person himself. You see, suicide is against the law. It's an absolute wrong. So neither by the person himself, so just because you feel like it doesn't mean you should do it, nor by any of his fellow creatures merely upon their own authority. At present, I shall only observe that whenever the constitution of a state vests in any man or body of men a power of destroying at pleasure, without the direction of laws, the lives or members of the subject, such constitution is in the highest degree tyrannical. Whenever any laws direct such destruction for light and trivial causes, such laws are likewise tyrannical. The statute law of England does therefore very seldom, and common law never inflict any punishment extending to life or limb. Okay, maiming is a punishment to your limb, unless upon the highest necessity, and the Constitution is an utter stranger to any arbitrary power of killing or maiming the subject without the express warrant of law. So you don't have a natural right to maim yourself. So the U.S. Department of Justice is going to go into this thinking or proposing that they have a natural right to intervene, to interfere with a person's maiming of themselves. So we're going to take a break. Actually, I've overrun my audio thing here, so I'm going to have to come back and edit my radio show. And so I'm going to skip ahead. I've had problems recording today. It's not going well for my functioning. I still have 4 segments to do. Oh, that was my last segment. Okay, so let me play real quick what it was I was talking about. See what it says. I don't hear it. I can't hear it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to do a second hour. So that's the end of this video. That's what we're going to do. Sorry about it not being perfect and being a little bit sketchy in its execution, but